60 years ago, the war in the Pacific was coming to an end, and as the Imperial Japanese Army retreated, its atrocities were revealed. The death camps of Changi and the Burma Railway shocked the Australian public. But there was another place, a place so barbaric, so terrible, that the Australian government decided it had to be kept secret from the public. A place called Sandakan. In this Japanese POW camp on the island of Borneo, the Australian death toll was near 100%. Yet only recently have the families of the men who died there learned the truth. A quite extraordinary story of horror and heroism. These are the faces of the doomed. In a corner of Canberra's War Memorial, a wall of photos, almost 1,800 of them. Young Australian diggers, sons, brothers, husbands, even fathers. All of them fated to die a terrible death in the worst Australian tragedy of World War II, at a place called Sandakan in the steaming jungles of Borneo.
When you have 1,800 prisoners, Australian prisoners, and only 6 survived because they escaped, and you have almost 650 British prisoners and nobody survived, it has to rank up there as one of the great disasters from the Second World War, particularly as the method and manner of death was pretty appalling.
Sandakan in Borneo, the site of the worst of Japanese prison camps, is now a memorial park to what historian Lynette Silver calls a terrible secret.
Things that were so bad that the Australian government decided deliberately not to tell the next of kin what had happened. And that's one reason why they haven't known for so long the details and the circumstances of this Sandakan story.
War has come to Singapore. In the wrecked and burning buildings, hundreds lie dead. Dead, too, is the comfortable myth of an impregnable fortress.
300,000 Allied troops surrendered with the fall of Singapore in 1942. They were committed to the unspeakable captivities of Changi, the Burma Railway, and now clearly the worst of all, Sandakan.
Just, I can't describe it. Just one big death house. A death house.
Keith Bottrell was one of only 6 men to survive Sandakan. They say history is written by the survivors, but in this case there were precious few to write it and none now alive to tell it. Bottrell died a haunted man 10 years ago, but his terrible testimony lives on forever.
Everyone was sick. Dysentery, beriberi, malaria, scabies, malnutrition, and it smelled, you can smell death. The smell of death was there all the time. We suffered a lot together. It brings you close. And I had to bury each one. I buried hundreds of good friends of mine, you know.
By 1944, Japan was losing the war in the Pacific, but in fact that made things even more desperate for the Allied prisoners. At Sandakan, rations were cut back to virtually nothing, and the death rate soared. Was there a decision made to kill all the prisoners towards the end?
Yes, there was a decision made at the end of 1944, whether it be by shooting or poisoning or hanging or whatever, it was to be done, and there was to be no one left afterwards. Annihilate them all were their words.
Since these men had to die, the Japanese decided to kill them with a purpose, to use them as pack animals for the Imperial Army's retreat through the mountainous jungles of Borneo. Back in the 1940s, this place was a virgin forest and tropical wilderness. In what became known as the death marches, the starving prisoners were forced to trek some 250 steamy kilometres through the roughest and most tortuous country on earth. This about this time of year that they marched, and today it's 36 degrees, and unbelievably the humidity is just on 100%. Certainly to me it feels like it. I am melting. I don't think I'd last more than a few hours out here. But having said that, looking around, it is one of the most indescribably beautiful places on the planet. Not that the POWs saw it that way. The confining thickness of the vegetation around here, they described as a green cage. A cage from which only 6 men would ever escape.
And if you got sick and couldn't carry the rice with berry in your legs, or you was too weak to carry on, they'd shoot you or planet you. For days on the march, we turned ourselves into a zombie. And you just didn't know you was marching or sleeping or resting, because there was no end to it. We never knew where we were going, which way we were going. Half the time you couldn't see the sun or the sky. Until it was pretty tough on the march. I'd sit down on the march up against the tree stump, and you'd just flop up against a tree stump and you'd feel yourself dying. You'd go into this, and if you woke up in the morning, you'd be surprised.
60 years later, the horrors of Sandakan still defy detailing. Crucifixions, castrations, hideous beatings and tortures, and, most unspeakable, cannibalism.
There were instances of them culling POWs from the pack, lopping off their arms and legs because they had too many sores, and taking the torsos downriver to their camp for human consumption. And they also killed and ate people at Pagnatan.
After the Japanese surrender, the Australian War Graves Unit moved in to recover the bodies. The government at last learned, but decided not to share the full extent of the disaster here. Because the truth was too awful, sons like Frank Murray were never told what happened to their fathers.
All the people I've met, the telegrams I received, all said they died of malaria. Didn't mention anything else.
Do you feel resentful about that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. How would you like somebody to come to you and not tell you the truth about what happened to your father?